And for information like Twitter handles, etc., and the full bios on any of our speakers, that information is, of course, on the rubyconf.org.au website. So make sure you go there if you miss a Twitter handle and want to follow anyone. So our next speaker is Liam McNally. So Liam, oops, I lost my notes, there we go, is the recruiting manager for engineering at GitLab. So he's based in Sydney. He's got over 10 years experience in HR and talent requisition and has spent the last 5 years working with the tech industry doing just that. And has specialised for the last 3 years in working with and scaling remote businesses. In addition to that, he's a former sprint runner, and when he's not working, you'll find him riding, crossfitting at a festival or getting out into nature. So please welcome to the stage, Liam McNally.
Hey everyone. Is it working? Working. It's all right. Oh, let's go back. Awesome. Hi everyone. I'm Liam. As we mentioned, I'm working at GitLab. I've been at GitLab for just over 1.5 years or so. And GitLab is an all-remote company. So we have 1,200 employees over 65 different countries, making us probably the largest all-remote company in the world. I've been working in the sort of recruitment and HR space for the last sort of 10 years. And the last 3.5 years, been working remotely and managing remote teams. I'm an avid traveler. And I've managed to visit over 50 countries in a fairly short time, and 20 of them have been whilst working remotely, and it's one of the reasons why I personally love working remotely. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of the pros of being a remote employee, and I think there's some really good pros, but there are definitely some really, there are some cons as well, which I guess when you're thinking about becoming a remote employee, you have to really think about and whether it's going to work for your lifestyle, but also what are the cons for you personally as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is flexibility, and it's probably one of the more obvious ones, is that you have a lot of different flexibility. You're able to work anywhere, you're able to choose your own working hours, and you're able to let your life dictate how you work. And you can have no dress code. There's plenty of times in meetings where I've still been in my pajamas, had a shirt on, but definitely didn't have, had pajamas on underneath. But I think it's really important that you have to not take advantage of the flexibility as well, and really make sure that you do give yourself some form of routine. One of the things that I do struggle with sometimes in the morning is just thinking and taking a moment to go and take that shower before jumping on that first meeting. I'm not the most morning person in the world, so I like to try and sleep in as close to the first meeting as possible. So having a bit of routine is really important. But I also think that a lot of businesses kind of do remote in lots of different ways. We are not very time zone focused. There are organizations that are out there that have remote teams but are very time zone specific, and you work within that given time zone. So I think thinking about whether you need that synchronous kind of environment is really important when you're thinking about going into remote working. But the flexibility really does allow you to let your life dictate how you work. And whether that will be that you want to travel, like I love doing, or whether you're an expat in a country and you want to go back and see your family for a number of months. I'm the oldest of 7, and I've got 6 nieces and nephews, all based in the UK. So being able to go back and actually spend quality time with family for extended periods of time without having to use leave and things is super important for me. But other people have things like childcare, which they really is really important to them as well. And the other thing is that I find with remote working is that it is a lot more of a results-focused kind of environment rather than time-focused, because you're not working 9 to 5 in a given place. And I also think that, especially if you're going to have lots of different time zones, you're going to have to be results-focused. You're going to have to take in the results rather than what the actual time that is put in. And it's the way we think about it is it's not how you get there. It's the fact that you got there. But I think one of the really big things about results focused, and one of the things that a lot of people do struggle with, is that you can make life your work. simply because you're constantly looking at the next result. So how can I quickly get there? How can I quickly get there? How can I quickly get there? And not taking that time to take a breath and go, actually, you know, I didn't work 9 till 5 or whatever hours that you chose to work, but 8 hours is enough. And taking that time to take that break. And the other thing is travel. I've taken a little bit I've spoken a little bit about it already, but you're able to travel all around the world or around the country. But I don't think travel only has to be, you know, exploring the world. It can be about location independence. We've got somebody that is working in New Zealand for us at the moment, Charlie, and she lives in the middle of nowhere, completely off the grid, apart from the internet. So kind of, as long as you've got the internet, you can work at GitLab. That's kind of how our motto. But she's able to work completely remote within a startup that is considered a Silicon Valley startup, but wherever she wants to be. And you can travel without taking leave. As I mentioned, I went back to the UK for 2 months and spent a lot of time with my nieces and nephews. You can completely do that. But one of the biggest struggles around travel is internet. So I went and worked in the Philippines recently on Coron Island, and I actually had to interview a hell of a lot of people whilst I was there. It didn't go very well. The internet was really poor and lots of rescheduling had to happen. So making sure that you're in locations and you do a bit of forethought for that is really important too. And this is the one that I love the most, is no more commute. No more sweaty trains. Growing up in London and doing the London rush hour, I'm so pleased that I never have to do that again. I recently went and worked in a friend's office in Sydney, and we decided to get there leave the house at 8 o'clock, which I hadn't seen 8 o'clock for a little while. And being on a train, packed like sardines on a Sydney train, was definitely an experience that I don't miss at all. But I think with no commute and going back to kind of that climate change talk, not having people, if a lot of people are living in rural areas, have to drive to train stations to get into work or take public transport and the like, you're taking away some of that as well, which is great. So some of the cons of being a remote employee, and there definitely are some, and these are some of the ones that I've personally felt a lot over the last 3.5 years. And the first one is that we all get lonely sometimes. Working remote 100% of the time, I'm constantly asking myself, where are all the people? And I'm kind of a naturally extroverted person anyway, so not having that constant interaction with my colleagues or just people on a day-to-day basis can be quite difficult. Luckily, I have things that I put into my routine that allow me to do that, things like going to CrossFit or going to my co-working space, which I think is absolutely awesome. But I think if you live alone and you're stuck in a project that is really, really just keeping you at home all the time, you can potentially not see people for days. And for me, it just wouldn't work. My mind would not be working to its best. And I think having all this flexibility, getting into a routine can be really, really difficult. So just really thinking about, before going into a remote role or applying for that remote position, is really thinking about what are the cons for yourself? What are the things that you're going to need to put in place to make sure that you're successful in doing that? And then decision-making time, and this is a really big frustration, definitely for me, is that having people across multiple different time zones makes it very, very difficult to get a decision very, very quickly. You can't just look over to your left and see your manager over there or your colleague and have a quick discussion about what you want to do moving forward. So, and one of the things that also adds is a lot of different voices. Because there's usually a 28, 48-hour time when that issue is out there, lots of people are taking different opinions and the like. But I think what happens is that you often land on a really, really good considered idea that's including a lot of different diverse opinions and different cultural norms as well, because you're having people from all these different countries having different discussions. And this one is definitely particularly difficult in onboarding, is having that strong information overload. I think within remote organizations, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is everything needs to be documented and everything is very, very process driven. There's less of the on-the-job training and definitely a lot more of having to read and go through a lot of different documentation. this is just, it can get very tiresome, and it can get very difficult to find what you're kind of looking for and to keep moving forward and keep progressing forward. And everything is done via write-in. So all the different communications, we use merge requests or issues within inside GitLab, or we use Slack and email and the like. So everything is done via write-in. So it can just, you feel like you're just constantly reading and constantly missing out on things. But I think one of the great things is that you can always look back on the information and find that information. So regardless of when you joined the business, you can see how a process has changed because you've got all the history of that documentation. But you can regardless of which time zone you're in, you're able to go and find the information that you need. So the next part of it is that I want to just talk about how to scale remote working. So one of the main things that I think is key, especially if you're not going to be time zone located, is asynchronous communication. And I think this really helps reinforce a results-focused environment rather than a times-focused environment. And it allows that flexibility and takes away that need for that office that a lot of organizations do need. But I do think it makes, one of the things that asynchronous communication does make very difficult is managing people. So I manage a team of around 8 people at the moment, and they are based in 8 different countries across about 5 different time zones. So usually Thursdays, today, is usually my really busy day where you have to do different one-on-ones at various different times in the day. So whilst you get a lot of flexibility, being able to manage your day, I think managing people is one of the more difficult things in a remote environment and a remote context. But also building out that rapport with your direct reports can be quite difficult as well. But saying that if you put in processes, procedures, and culture that allows you to really build that rapport, whether that will be going to be able to visit people that you work with at any given time and the like, that's really important. So one of the things that we do at GitLab is something called Contribute, which takes us to one single location each year and allows us to all get together, collaborate, and actually build those relationships that we need. And I think that's really important in any remote environment. Documentation. So because we are async, this is super important. And you need to be process orientated. And I think that's one of the hard things about implementing remote in a young company or a startup business, is because you want to be scrappy. The whole idea is being in a startup is you're scrappy, you're able to move quick and you're able to move fast. So bringing remote working into that kind of environment, it can work, but you have to put some process around what scrappy means, which isn't always easy. And the documentation needs to be searchable and readable. It can't be long prose. It can't be really, really deep, complex text. And this process has to be really easy to understand and easy to follow. It's one of the things that we probably struggled the most. We have, I think, 3,000 pages in our handbook. It's just impossible to get through it. And I love reading, but there's a lot of stuff in there. So it's impossible to get through all the information. But making it really, we've actually built out a development team to actually build out what our handbook would look like and make it super searchable, super readable, and super easy to digest. And that's one of the things that I think is important for us. One of the things that documentation does take away, and is a really great advantage for us, is that there's no single point of failure inside the organization. So if somebody does leave, those processes are all documented, and they're always going to be there. If somebody leaves, I was actually chatting to a friend who works at a fairly large bank, and a lot of the HR processes are from the person that's been there for 15, 20 years, and that's the person you go and ask about how do you do this or how do you do that? What's going to happen when that person decides to leave? That's one of the things that is taken away within the documentation. And this one is kind of a controversial one. For us, I think it works, and I think it works. I think this is the best way to do it, but it's definitely not the only way. And if you're considering joining a remote team, or if you are considering moving a business to all remote or having a remote team, there are ways that you can have it a bit of a split. But I think having an all remote team allows the whole culture to be that, and it avoids this us and them approach to work. The reason why that is, and some of the things that we've seen with remote teams, is that promotions tend to happen with the people that are inside the office, or there are a lot more discussions and a lot more decisions are made with the people inside the office, simply because they're more visible. And taking away that need to be visible and still being able to have a voice inside the organization is super important. So you can do this by having split teams that are remote and some are not, 100%, but it's about making sure that the processes are there and that the culture is there to make sure that people do align with that. And it takes away that bias and takes away people just generally feeling left out. In the previous organization I worked in, we had about 6 or 7 different hubs, but I was a remote employee in the Sunshine Coast, and there was lots of people that were remote, I would say 30% of the organization. But you heard a lot about, oh, we made this decision in our Bushwick office in Brooklyn, that's the reason why now it's getting implemented, and you're like, hold on a second, I didn't even realize this was actually happening. So making sure that lots of people and you feel included is super important. Strong values. So I always caveat this with don't hire the same people over and over again, because a lot of people think that is what is the cultural norm, is that everybody needs to get along. But I think hiring against those values is super important. So having really, really strong values and hiring against them, so people that come in are able to slot right into how the business works and how the business functions. And then live and breathe those values in every interaction that you do, both internally and externally. So one of the core values at GitLab is transparency. So everything is freely available for everybody to look at. So if you want to see the recruitment processes and strategies that I'm working on right now, you can jump onto GitLab and you're able to go and see that. It's completely open for everybody. But that obviously comes with its challenges as well, because a lot of that information is out there. So if we're talking about things that are maybe more of controversial ideas, that gets sent out there as well. But it's about not compromising those values simply because there's risk. And I think that's one of the things that is super important too. And then praise those values and praise the use of those values in public and show examples of how they've helped the organization move forward. But then also in private, call out where values aren't met. And one of the things we do as well, we don't do this just from the top down, we do this from the bottom up as well. So there's channels and ways that we can give the CEO feedback, for example, and he prefers to have it direct and in open forums and discussions. But we're able to give him feedback and say, actually, we don't think that you're adhering to our cultural values, and you need to pick it up. And we can do that with our managers, and we make sure that we create a comfortable environment that allows that to happen. And then don't be afraid to iterate. And I think with a room full of engineers, I don't think this is ever going to be a problem. But I think one of the things is that making sure that it's everybody's job. So if it's not working, fix it and make sure that it's everyone's role. And it doesn't matter whether they're the subject matter expert for that particular organization within the business as well. So if somebody in HR sees that there's this weird process that's happening inside the engineering team, they're able to go in and submit a merge request and say, actually, I think we might change this or try it to this, and people can start generating that discussion. And we have so many people that actually do that internally as well for the HR process and the people processes. How can we get a better diversity within the organization? How can we make our process quicker, because we do have a particularly long process at this point. And then the last bit I wanted to kind of speak about is how does remote help you scale your team? So naturally, I'm going to talk about recruiting. I think recruiting is a very, very obvious example of how remote working can really, really make you scale and scale in a very meaningful way. You can hire anywhere, providing that is the process that you want to follow. As I mentioned, we have people in over 65 different countries, but I think if we actually went through and how many countries we've actually truly been in, it's probably around 75, which is a whole heap of countries, which is great, and it gives people a lot of autonomy to where they actually want to be. You can hire faster because your pool is so big. You can start really pinpointing great people in lots of different locations. And the world is your talent pool. And I think it comes, this is really important for the next point, is that the world is your talent pool, because it makes diversity and making a diverse organization a little bit easier. I don't think it's and as we all know, tech has a big issue with diversity and having people of color, women, people in the LGBTQI community within inside the tech space. So if you want to build out a really diverse organization, remote could be a way to go. But I don't think it's a perfect solution. And the reason why I say that is a diverse hire in one location isn't necessarily a diverse hire in another. But I think if we approach it in a different way, is that we're trying to make a diverse company and have lots of different opinions and thoughts and feelings, then we're able to kind of push forward with that a lot better. The other one, of course, is costs. So you don't have any office rent anymore. In-office employee overheads decrease. So with the in-office employee overheads, I think a lot of tech businesses, they have a lot of in-office benefits. So I think before I started at GitLab, I interviewed at somewhere and they had a chef on site and things like that. They had all these wonderful ping pong tables and the like. So you can avoid that, but what I think converse to that is that you're able to then provide actual meaningful benefits to people. With that money you're saving from having all of those in-office benefits. So, and I think you can make them really quite customizable as well. One of the things that we're working on currently is how we can customize benefits for the individual employee rather than as a big group. So if childcare is important to someone, if going to the gym is important to someone, if travel is important to someone, you can actually have meaningful benefits that affect their life in a meaningful way. And then commuting costs for employees. So I think when I was in the UK, when I was living a bit further out from London, I think my season ticket was £2,000 a year, about $4,000. You already just saved that. It's pretty good. In employee happiness, I think having a sense of self-management, more control over how you live and work, and more time and less commute, feeling trusted, and then having that career development anywhere is great. I think having, a lot of people want to work with inside startups and in Silicon Valley startups, but don't have the means or the way of getting to San Francisco or New York or wherever it may be. You're able to provide a company that gives all of that to people anywhere in the world. So it's definitely a great employee branding opportunity. And then finally, increased productivity. You have fewer meetings, there's less distractions from inside an office, and you can get more done in less time. And then what we've found as well is that turnover tends to be less. Simply because people are, going back to the previous slide, people are a lot more happy with inside their environment. They are able to benefit a hell of a lot more from the remote surroundings and work from wherever they want. So it's a really big draw to keep people on a longer term basis. So in conclusion, I love remote working. I absolutely adore it. Maybe one day we'll end up back in an office, but I don't think that's coming anytime soon. But I think if you're considering being a remote employee yourself, really think about and write down what are the pros for me, but what are the cons, and how am I gonna make them work for my lifestyle? And if you're considering doing that as a business as well, is really think about how is this going to affect my business materially, but also is it really important that people need to be in the office? Because a lot of companies do require that, and a lot of businesses do require that. But if it's not necessary for you and you're able to give your employees an amazing experience, but externally, then more power to you. And if you want to find more information about working remotely, we have a remote guide on our website as well. Thank you very much.